Imagine being told you're going to jail. Scary stuff, right? Well, imagine you were so powerful that you could dictate what this prison would actually look like. Sound too good to be true? Unfortunately, none of us are that powerful, and the people who are indeed aren't watching a video like this. Still, there are people out there that have been able to rewrite their circumstances to benefit themselves. However, that list is short, very short, and one such man is the infamous Pablo Escobar. One might argue that Pablo Escobar doesn't need an introduction, considering the amount we already know about the man thanks to the endless television series depicting the famous cartel boss. Regardless, to understand how we get to the point where Pablo Escobar lives inside a unique and baffling 5-star prison of his own design, we need to explore the context of Escobar's situation that resulted in him being arrested in the first place. Pablo, before the notoriety. When Pablo Escobar was born, his family moved to Envigado, Colombia. His mother, a schoolteacher, and his father, a farmer. One might assume he'd grow up into a well-adjusted person who could make a good life for himself. But at the end of the day, humans sometimes become products of their environment. Escobar was no exception. Pablo's life of crime started long before he wound up in prison. When Escobar was a teenager in high school, he made a living doing numerous dubious activities. It started out light, with fake high school diplomas. Escobar moved on quickly to selling fake lottery tickets, selling stolen tombstones, smuggling stereo equipment, stealing cars, and various other petty crimes. He was arrested in 1974 for stealing a car, and it was his first offense that resulted in an arrest. While that's bad in its own right, it was hardly where it ended, and we all know that for a fact. The early rise of the cocaine king. In the 70s, Colombia was experiencing an industry growth that would unfortunately become a defining characteristic of Colombia. Thanks to its proximity to the neighboring countries of Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, Colombia was now becoming the cocaine capital. Escobar has never been considered an idiot, and he seized on this moment. Escobar grew with the industry, initially as a smuggler of this potent and dangerous drug. Then, in the mid-70s, he founded the Medellin cartel with the Ochoa brothers, Juan, Jorge, Luis, David, and Fabio. He was their leader, naturally, and they began to focus on the production, transportation, and sale of cocaine. They were ambitious and had a plan to become the biggest cartel in the world. Their ambitions would serve them well, considering the early successes that made them the biggest cartel come the mid-80s. The United States of faithful customers. The United States' relationship with narcotics isn't a pleasant one. In fact, it's downright toxic. However, the war on drugs is one they'd been fighting for a few years at this point, thanks to Richard Nixon. He gave it a title and the gravitas to propel it to the national circuit, even though it had been around since the early 20th century.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
While the war on drugs was and has remained a controversial aspect of American history in the late 20th century, its staying power has lingered. Presidents long after Nixon continued this war. It became almost a part of the first family's agenda, regardless of political affiliation. This war wasn't necessarily in response to cocaine, but it encompassed all drugs. The only problem? America was the biggest customer of Pablo Escobar, who incidentally sold drugs, and a lot of them. It's not that cocaine was new to the States. It was in Coca-Cola back in the late 19th century, until it was forever dropped in 1903. But the country's relationship with the drug changed in 1914 when the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act was passed into law and regulated the sale of most narcotics, including cocaine. The perception of cocaine shifted over the course of the 20th century, when it became known as a poor people's drug or a minority's drug. To say that there was an agenda would be an understatement. It's not even factually correct, considering the notion of cocaine being used by the fringes of society is debunked by the knowledge that researchers found 90% of the US banknotes had traces of cocaine attached to them. For a while, after the passing of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, the sale and proliferation of cocaine in America was drastically reduced to a point where it was considered to be a thing of the past. But crack doesn't crack. Well, you know what we mean. Come the 60s, things were about to take a drastic backslide. Why? Well, I guess we have the Beatles' Abbey Road and the iconic Woodstock Music Festival to thank for being the catalyst for drug use in America, coming back to its highest levels in decades. The timing couldn't be better for a young Escobar, who embarked on a mission, one which he'd succeed in, smuggling drugs en masse to the United States of America. This perception of cocaine was rapidly changing from the drug of the fringe to a party drug with an image of wealth, glamour, and that good old 70s disco. So, who was behind this effective marketing campaign? None other than the cocaine king himself, Pablo Escobar. Thanks to America's insatiable appetite for his narcotics, Escobar became a millionaire by the mid-70s with around $3 million. There was no slowing down, and their operations expanded at an accelerated pace. More equipment, routes, manpower, airplanes, and more would put Escobar on a path to become a billionaire in no time. He'd reinvented the wheel, made cocaine a party drug, a Wall Street drug, the rich man's drug, the everyday man's drug, and people couldn't get enough of the stuff. America may have been in a war with drugs, but America didn't seem to see it that way.
For the sake of our children, I implore each of you to be unyielding and inflexible in your opposition to drugs. Our young people are helping us lead the way. Not long ago in Oakland, California, I was asked by a group of children what to do if they were offered drugs. And I answered, just say no.
The cocaine king pulls the strings. Back home, Escobar was seen as a hero to his community, whom he constantly helped. Sure, he was a violent killer who ran a criminal organization, but money talks. And boy, did Escobar's bank account have a mouthful. Escobar was a billionaire, and his power was unprecedented. He had so many officials in his back pocket, he might as well have had the title of shadow president. In 1990, a candidate was running for president that Escobar didn't like, Luis Carlos Galan. He was an ambitious new political figure with a desire to clean up Colombia and retake it from drug lords like Escobar. By this point, Escobar was wanted in America. The country wanted him extradited to US soil, where they'd make him pay for his sins against the American people.
The second element of our strategy looks beyond our borders, where the cocaine and crack bought on America's streets is grown and processed. In Colombia alone, cocaine killers have gunned down a leading statesman, murdered almost 200 judges, and 7 members of their Supreme Court.
This intense attention and the prospects of a president hell-bent on Escobar's demise meant only one solution. He had to go. Galan was eventually assassinated, and for some time, there was no evidence supporting Escobar's involvement. However, it was confirmed years later that he had orchestrated the assassination. An uncontrollable beast. Escobar had become so connected to Colombia's political leaders that it was clear after Galan's assassination that they'd become a cartel beyond control and existing not just outside the law, but above it. A new government came into power and crafted the 1991 Constitution. And in that constitution was a point that made extradition of Colombians to any country, including the United States, a no-go. It's easy to see Pablo's influence on the country's constitution. Money and fear talk, and when it does, politicians listen. Escobar had made a surprising, yet not surprising, deal with the Colombian government. He'd turn himself in and remain locked up for a period of 5 years. But he had one major condition. He didn't want to live like a prisoner. Far from it, actually. He wanted a prison he'd designed himself, filled with his own protection, made up of members of the cartel. Suppose you're thinking a billionaire cartel leader was opting for simplicity in the design of his prison, which the government, not so surprisingly, agreed to. In that case, you clearly don't know Pablo Escobar. A prison fit for the cocaine king. Escobar had a lot of money, and he had the means to make a palace, or in this case, a prison fit for a king. The prison he'd go on to create for his 5-year confinement would end up getting the nickname Club Medellin, or more commonly known as Hotel Escobar. The interior of this prison was one of a 5-star hotel. No expense was spared, and considering he'd spend 5 years of his life there, and only there, it makes sense. He created a prison with multiple rooms, an expansive kitchen, and stunning, lavish living rooms, dining room, and entertainment areas. Hotel Escobar was located on a mountaintop, a location he chose himself after seeing it while on a hike with his brother. It was difficult to reach, and this was by design. The conditions of the mountain were that of rough terrain and constant fog, meaning that he was well protected, which isn't something usually associated with a prisoner. Their safety usually isn't a concern to prisons. Escobar even had telescopes to make sure he could see if anyone was approaching from far away, and he had a view of the surroundings to see more immediate intruders. The prison itself had high walls and barbed wire fences. Better yet was that this prison was well stocked with weapons and ammunition, so maybe it should be called Fort Escobar instead of Hotel Escobar. So sure, the outside was prison-like, but the inside was a whole different ballgame. No, literally, there was a soccer pitch. Escobar was an avid fan of the sport, so he made sure there was a field to facilitate some games. Pablo even had the audacity and power to invite the Colombian national team to his prison for a game. The 91 team actually took him up on the offer. Escobar fed the players like royalty. They played a game, they humored the dangerous cartel boss who was nowhere near as in shape or as skilled as them, and treated his guests well into the night as they had a disco because he had a room with a dance floor. Sounds like the strangest night in a prison anyone's ever had. He even celebrated his 45th birthday with friends and family at his lavish home. Prison, and treated them to expensive food, quality entertainment, and a good time. To emphasize the size of this palace would be to mention the numerous party rooms, which were specifically designed for guests to enjoy billiards, watch sports, or relax. Not many people can say that they've had a great time at prison, but if you were friends with Escobar and managed to get an invite, you're one of the few. Escobar even invited models to Hotel Escobar. Because why not? The idea that Escobar was in prison is one that's hard to really get behind, considering the reality behind his years at Hotel Escobar. When there are so many luxury items like saunas, jacuzzis, a gym, a pool, a soccer field, dance floor, lavish rooms, entertainment rooms, with endless models and escorts, friends and family coming to the mountain through the fog, one can't say he was having a bad time as a prisoner. Escobar still had communications with the outside world. His operations were still running, and he knew what was going on. One might even argue that his prison sentence was more like witness protection, considering he was safely locked away from his enemies who looked to do him harm and end his reign. A change of heart. The problem with Escobar was he didn't have a limit. Once he became this larger-than-life figure, it was hard to just slow down and reduce his hold on his criminal enterprise or nefarious dealings. Escobar had ordered the murder of 2 cartel members, and word traveled fast. A year into staying at the glamorous prison, the Colombian government somewhat reneged, or I guess reworked the agreement, and decided it was time to send him to a real prison. Turns out, some government officials weren't fully aware of Escobar's prison situation, and learning the truth put a sour taste in their mouths. There was one flaw in this plan. The agreement meant they couldn't remove him from the property, so instead they improvised and sought to craft a prison cell on the property to stay in line with the agreement while stripping Escobar of his many privileges. As you can imagine, Pablo wasn't happy about this whatsoever. Nobody was up to the task of building his cell. The Bureau of Prisons was corrupt and inefficient, and private contractors point blank refused to work with Escobar on the property, deeming it asking for a target on their backs. So they decided they'd take Escobar down from the mountain. Hell breaks loose at Hotel Escobar. It was July 1992, and the Colombian National Army's 4th Brigade surrounded Hotel Escobar with the Vice Minister of Justice in tow to remove Escobar from his luxury prison. They were armed and ready to go, but lowered their weapons at Escobar's request. It was when Pablo took the Vice Minister of Justice hostage that everything took a turn and all hell broke loose. Men were killed and injured, and Escobar would escape their clutches with little effort. It was a real slap in the face considering these men had been highly trained by the United States Delta Force and were equipped to handle the situation, yet somehow were outsmarted by a single person. Long live the king. Escobar managed to escape and evade capture for over 16 months, but everything good must come to an end, and Escobar's freedom and life would be cut short when he was shot and killed, ending the reign of Colombia's legendary drug lord and king of cocaine.